Hello everyone. Tonight we travel back in time to the 17th of November, 1558, to Westminster Abbey in London. A magnificent coronation ceremony is underway, and 25-year-old Elizabeth Tudor is about to become Queen of England. But if you could get a little closer, you might catch a nauseating smell, to scent of sweat, spices and decay mixed together, wafting from the woman who would go on to rule England for 45 years, as the Bin of Virgin Queen. So if you enjoy strange and fascinating stories, please take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to see viewers from all over the world. Join us. Elizabeth is celebrated as one of the greatest monarchs in English history. She defeated the Spanish Armada and ushered in the golden age of England and naval supremacy. But tonight, we peel back the polished surface to reveal shocking secrets, disgusting hygiene habits that even the bravest court historians dared not record in detail. Did you know Elizabeth's personal hygiene was so poor that even her closest courtiers complained in private letters about the smell? In 1597, Phoenician ambassador Andrea Horot delicately noted in his report to the Doge that the Queen emits a particular odour that requires a great deal of spice to mask. This was no poetic exaggeration, neither was a diplomated, most polite way of describing an unbearable reality. In 16th century England, personal hygiene was understood very differently from today. People believed that frequent bathing opened the pores and allowed disease to enter the body, so nobles preferred to cover body odour with spices and perfumes. But even by the standards of that era, Elizabethan habits were extreme. Her ladies-in-waiting privately nicknamed her the Bin of Fragrant Queen, and yes, the Mun of Fragrant was meant ironically. Imagine Elizabeth walking into the palace hall, and the nobles instinctively stepping back, not out of respect, but to escape the overwhelming stench. The hem of her gown dragged across the floor, collecting all manner of indescribable stains, and she seemed not to care. Court etiquette demanded elegance before the Queen, but when she passed by you could see the nobles forcing smiles as they held their breath. Even more surprising, Elizabeth seemed rather proud of these habits. At one court banquet she once joked, "I may not be the sweetest rose, but I am surely the longest lasting." The foreign ambassadors present glanced at one another, unsure how to respond. Historians have long debated accounts of Elizabeth's hygiene. Some argue the descriptions were exaggerated by political enemies seeking to tarnish her image, but growing evidence suggests these records may well reflect reality. After all, in an age when even kings rarely bathed, her female rulery hygiene could easily become a subject of gossip and scrutiny. When Elizabeth looked at herself in the mirror, she did see the idealized portraits we now find in museums. She saw a real woman, rough skin, blackened teeth, thinning hair, yet she knew that as a queen she had to maintain her authority and beauty by any means necessary, even if those very methods worsened her hygiene. This contradiction would follow her throughout her reign, an obsession with perfect image on one hand and a disregard for basic cleanliness on the other. Elizabeth's bathing habits were enough to leave modern people speechless. In an age when ordinary people would at least wash their bodies with water several times a month, the Queen of England insisted on bathing only twice a year, once in spring and once in autumn. Her reasoning sounded both absurd and oddly pitiable. "I do not need to bathe often whether I need to or not." This line, recorded by her personal maid, became one of the most baffling quotes of the Tudor dynasty. Remember that the Venetian ambassador would report. In another more detailed record he described the queenical cleansing ritual. On bath days, Elizabeth would order her servants to prepare a huge wooden tub filled with warm water, then scatter large amounts of rose petals and lavender into it. Sounds romantic, right? In reality, the petals' main job was to mask the various unpleasant things floating in the water, dead skin and other indescribable substances shed from her body. Even more absurd was her insistence that the bath water must be virgin water, meaning water that had never been touched by any man. To ensure this, the court assigned a special team of young maids to fetch, heat and mix the bath water. The process usually took an entire day, since every drop had to pass a strict purity inspection. The Tudor court had deep-rooted fears and superstitions about water. People believed it carried diseases, especially mysterious female ailment. Medical theory at the time held that frequent contact with water could cause the womb to shift, harming fertility for a lifelong unmarried queen. This concern might seem strange, but Elizabeth clearly believed it. Court physician Dr. John Dee once advised her to bathe more often to improve her skin. But Elizabeth flatly refused, replying, God created perfume so that we would not have to depend too much on water. The logic left physicians both amused and helpless. After all, who could refute a queen in theological argument? On the many days she did not bathe, Elizabeth relied on a cleaning method known as dry washing. Her maids would dip linen cloths into rose water and peppermint oil, then gently wipe her body. This ritual took place once a week, usually on Sunday mornings. The effect, as you might guess, was limited to mostly just move the dirt from one place to another. Even more shocking was the frequency with which she changed her underwear. Court laundry records show that her undergarments were washed only once a month. In the 16th century, this was already considered freak, but given that she only bathed twice a year, you can imagine the state of those garments before washing. What did the rest of the court think of these habits? Outwardly, no one dared speak ill, but private complaints never ceased. A French ambassador wrote in a confidential letter, "The consumption of perfume in the English court is 3 times that of France, and this is no accident." A polite statement, but the meaning could not be clearer. Interestingly, Elizabeth herself seemed unaware of her body odor. She would often ask her maids, "How do I smell today?" And the poor women had no choice but to lie. "Burn like a spring garden, your Major." Such well-intentioned falsehoods only reinforced her belief that her cleanliness strategy was correct. Of course, historians have long debated the accuracy of records about Elizabeth's bathing habits. Some argue these accounts may have been exaggerated as the political climate of the time made any negative rumor about the Queen easy to amplify. Yet the consistency of multiple independent sources makes such dismissals ring hollow. Winter at Greenwich Palace was especially trying. With no effective ventilation, the queenly odour would build up in the closed rooms. Servants learned a special breathing technique, breathing through the mouth instead of the nose, to reduce the impact. This method was quietly passed along, almost like a required courtly skill. Elizabeth's habits were not merely a personal matter. They affected the entire court's social life. At balls, noblemen would eagerly invite other ladies to dance, while dancing with the Queen was seen as a glorious try. Maintaining composure in such close proximity to her was considered the mark of a true gentleman. Imagine the shock of foreign ambassadors meeting the Queen for the first time. They arrived at the supposedly elegant English court, only to face a severe test of their sense of smell. Many subtly referred in their reports to the English court, J's unique habit of using spites, a diplomatic euphemism understood by all. If Elizabeth's even habits were shocking, then her dental condition was nothing short of a visual nightmare. By the 1590s, when the 60-year-old Queen opened her mouth, what greeted the eye was not rows of pearl-white teeth, but a revolting black ruin. German Ambassador Paul Melville wrote in a private letter, "Pat, Her Majesty's teeth present a blackness I have never before seen, as if they had been burned by coals." This was no exaggeration. Elizabeth, the dental problems became so severe that she rarely smiled in public in her later years. The culprit was sugar, the most expensive and coveted luxury of the 16th century. Elizabeth's obsession with sugar bordered on pathological. She consumed enormous quantities of sugar-based desserts, candied fruits, and syrups daily, and even added 3 times the usual amount of sugar to her tea. At the time, sugar was imported mainly from the West Indies, and was so expensive that £1 cost the equivalent of a common labourer 2 months' wages. For the Queen, cost was no obstacle. Her sugar consumption accounted for a significant portion of the court tea total expenses. Even more absurd was her belief in sugar's miraculous health benefits. Court physicians, eager to please, invented all sorts of medical theories about it. They claimed sugar could balance the human, preserve the purity of royal blood, and even prolong a virgin youth. These absurdities only encouraged the Queen to indulge more recklessly in sweets. Remember those Venetian ambassador in reports in describing her eating habits? He noted that after every meal, Elizabeth would enjoy a special dessert called royal preserves. Made almost entirely from sugar, honey and spices, it was cloyingly sweet. The Queen would savour it slowly with a small silver spoon, letting out a satisfied sigh with each bite. Unbeknownst to her, each mouthful was another blow to her teeth. By around 1585, toothache began seriously affecting her daily life. Court records show she often cancelled important council meetings due to dental pain. On one occasion, she stayed in bed for 3 full days, refusing to see anyone. Her maids could hear her moaning in agony, the sound so pitiful. It was hard to bear. Dentistry at the time was primitive, with essentially one treatment extraction. But Elizabeth had an extreme fear of tooth-pulling. She once said, "But I would rather endure the torments of hell than allow anyone to touch my teeth." Her fear was understandable, since 16th century tooth extractions performed without anesthesia or antiseptics were brutal and carried a high risk of death. In an attempt to ease her pain, Elizabeth tried an array of bizarre remedies. She rinsed her mouth with warm honey, believing it would dissolve the evil within the tooth. She held cloves and cinnamon sticks between her teeth to mask the foul odor of decay. Most curious of all, she had her maids rub rose petals on her gums, convinced it would restore the dignity of the royal mouse. Her halitosis grew so severe that the court established a set of elaborate etiquette rules to cope. Anyone speaking to the Queen was required to keep at least 3 feet away. If the Queen approached, courtiers were trained to step discreetly back while maintaining a respectful posture. This halitosis diplomacy became a distinctive feature of Elizabethan court culture. Most shockingly, Elizabeth sometimes attempted to treat her toothache with even more sugar. Her logic was simple. If sugar made her happy, then more sugar must conquer the pain. This vicious cycle caused her dental health to spiral downward. By the late 1590s, she had lost nearly all her molars, leaving only a few loose front teeth. Court painters faced unprecedented challenges when depicting her. They developed special techniques to conceal her dental statues, among them, portraying her with firmly closed lips. This is why in almost all surviving portraits of Elizabeth she never shows her teeth. The enigmatic regal expression in those images was, in truth, hiding an embarrassing reality. Her French ambassador recorded, in a secret report, one unforgettable. At a formal banquet, the Queen bit into a piece of roasted meat, and one of her loose teeth fell out, clattering onto the silver plate. The room fell into dead silence, but Elizabeth continued eating as if nothing had happened. Her unshakable composure inspired both awe and fear in all present. Scholars still debate the severity of Elizabeth's dental problems. Some believe medical records from the time exaggerated her symptoms, as dental health was often seen as a reflection of moral character, yet the consistent testimony of multiple independent sources makes such skepticism hard to maintain. One can only imagine the misery of ministers forced into long private discussions with her. They had to focus on affairs of state while enduring suffocating breath. It is quite possible that some of England's most important political decisions were made in that uncomfortable atmosphere, adding an absurd yet authentic layer to the nation in history. Elizabeth's obsession with a flawless appearance ironically became the very cause of her disfigurement. Her morning makeup ritual was like a slow suicide, coating her entire face with lead-based white powder, tinting her cheeks with mercurochrome rouge, and lining her eyes with sepia-based pigments. These beauty treasures were in the 16th century marks of noble status, but in truth they were deadly poisons, eating away at the queen's skin and health day by day. The most notorious of these was a cosmetic known as Venetian ceruse. Its main ingredients were white lead and lead acetate, capable of creating the pale complexion most coveted at the time. Elizabeth applied a thick layer of it daily, from forehead to chin, even covering her neck and arms. Her lady-in-waiting, Catherine Ashley, wrote in her private diary, "The queen's face is like a white wall. Sometimes I cannot tell where her skin ends and her foundation begins." Worse still, Elizabeth believed this powder had magical protective powers. Court quacks told her that lead could box evil air from entering the pores and protect royal blood from commonest diseases. This absurd theory fed her pathological dependence on lead cosmetics. Even in private chambers, she insisted on wearing the white powder, fearing that bare skin might inhale impure vapors. Remember the bathing story? Now you can see why Elizabeth resisted washing. Each bath meant removing her carefully applied cosmetics and exposing the skin beneath, already corroded and pitted over time. Symptoms of lead poisoning emerged. Her skin turned rough and mottled with large patches of discoloration and ulceration, yet she chose to cover these with more makeup, never abandoning the toxic substances. By the 1580s, her skin problems had become shocking. A Spanish ambassador and confidential report described her unpainted face as rotting cheese, pocked and scarred. Harsh as it sounds, it may have been close to the truth. Long-term lead poisoning damaged not only her skin but also her nervous system, causing memory loss and mood swings. Her hair loss was equally dramatic. Cosmetics made from mercury and sulfur corroded the scalp as well as the skin, leading to severe baldness. By the age of 40, Elizabeth was nearly bald and relied on increasingly elaborate wigs to preserve her image. These wigs, often made from human hair, sometimes weighed as much as 5 pounds, and required complex support structures to stay in place. The wig-making process was itself a disturbing industry. Hair was sourced from executed criminals, the sick or impoverished rural women. It was treated with chemicals, sulfur, mercury, and arsenic, to achieve the desired color and texture. Imagine Elizabeth wearing such a toxic creation for 10 or more hours a day. Her obsession with wigs bordered on mania. She owned over 80 each, with a specific purpose and symbolic meaning. Red wigs symbolized her Tudor heritage, gold wigs represented divine kingship, and white wigs were for mourning. The total value of her collection equaled the cost of a warship, yet Elizabeth saw it as a necessary investment to preserve royal dignity. The court had an entire wig maintenance team of 6 maids. Their work included cleaning, repairing, and changing the queening wigs. The job was dangerous. Chemical residues caused rashes, breathing problems, even poisoning, but refusal was not an option. Turning down such work meant betraying the crown. Elizabeth's makeup routine typically took 3 hours. First, maids applied a special cream called Bon Vegan in Bang, containing mercury and white arsenic, said to preserve the purity of the skin. Then came the thick white foundation, followed by rouge, eyeshadow, and lipstick. Finally, the queening wig was fixed in place, and heavy perfume was used to mask the chemical stench. A French ambassador once witnessed part of this process. Later writing, "It was like watching a living person turn into a wax figure." The comparison was more accurate than he realized. Prolonged lead use did make the skin lose elasticity and take on a waxen stiffness. Melbourne medical analysis of Elizabeth the cosmetics shows that her daily toxic intake was enough to kill a horse. The human body and adaptability is remarkable. Years of low-dose exposure gave her a certain tolerance, but the cost was high. Her internal organs were slowly failing, and her nervous system was deteriorating. Interestingly, Elizabeth seemed vaguely aware of the danger. She once half-joked to a maid, "Perhaps I should use less white powder, for I am already white enough." Yet she never truly changed her habits. She could not bear the thought of revealing her natural face. Historians still debate the exact toxicity of her cosmetics. Some argue that accounts may be exaggerated, as 16th century chemical knowledge was limited, and people may have overestimated the danger. But modern toxicology confirms that the lead, mercury, and arsenic content of her cosmetics was indeed sufficient to cause serious harm. Imagine the ordeal of those in close proximity to the Queen each day. The pungent chemical fumes, mixed with body odor and bad breath, created an almost unbearable olfactory assault. Yet everyone had to pretend not to notice, even to praise the queenine fragrance and unbued. This collective pretense became a defining feature of Tudor court culture. Elizabeth the appalling personal hygiene was not an isolated case, but rather a microcosm of the Tudor court collective sanitation disaster. The royal residences of Greenwich, Hampton Court, and Whitehall, which looked splendid on the surface, were in reality among the filthiest and foulest places in 16th century Europe. Imagine hundreds of nobles, attendants, servants, and guards crammed together, most of whom bathed only a handful of times a year, and you can understand why foreign envoys often described the English court in private letters as a bitter fragrant hells. The palace chamber pot system was nothing short of a nightmare. With no modern sewage network, the entire complex relied on a crude, primitive arrangement. Every room was equipped with ornate silver or ceramic chamber pots, but their emptying was highly irregular. Sometimes these pots overflowed for days before being cleared, filling the corridors with stench. Worse still, the waste was often dumped directly into the River Thames, the same river from which the court drinking water was drawn. Remember the queening love of perfumes. The entire court imitated her, attempting to mask their own odor with spices and fragrance. The result was a suffocating cocktail of smells: sweat, excrement, rotting meat, decayed teeth, layered with rose, lavender, musk, and ambergris. The mix was so distinctive that experienced diplomats claimed they could identify a member of the English court by scent alone. The state of the court kitchens was equally revolting. There were no basic hygiene measures during food preparation. Cooks rarely washed their hands, and tableware was cleaned haphazardly. Spoiled meat was heavily spiced and served regardless, while mouldy bread was thought to bun at flair. Elizabeth herself seemed unfazed by these issues. She even praised dishes that were bun strong in tea, believing pungency to be a mark of quality. Even more shocking was the courtier sleeping arrangement. Apart from the Queen and a handful of senior nobles, most courtiers shared rooms. and often beds. It was common for a dozen people to crowd onto a single large bed, many of them unwashed for months. Sheets and blankets were almost never changed, and lice, fleas, and other parasites thrived. Records note that some nobles even took pride in the number of lice they carried, claiming it proved their noble blood allure to parasites. The Queen's personal hygiene set the tone for the entire court. If even the monarch bathed rarely, no one else felt compelled to keep clean. This born-downward contagion effect warped aristocratic attitudes toward hygiene. Refusing to bathe became a fashion statement, a way to signal that one was too highborn to rely on commoners' cleaning hads. Court physicians faced an impossible task, improving public health without offending the Queen. They invented absurd theories to explain frequent outbreaks of illness, blaming evil winds rather than poor sanitation. When plague swept through the palace, doctors advised increasing the use of spices instead of improving cleanliness. Animals too suffered in this sanitary disaster. The court kept many hunting dogs, horses and pets, but their living conditions were equally grim. Dog and horse droppings littered the grounds, and animal carcasses sometimes lay rotting for days before removal. Elizabeth doted on her small hunting dogs, often letting them sleep in her bed, further worsening her personal hygiene. Foreign envoys. First impressions of the English court were often shock and disgust. Russian ambassador Ivan Volkov wrote, "I thought the Tsarina court was rough enough, but compared to England, Moscow is paradise." This may have been an exaggeration, but it reflected the widespread perception of England courtly filth. Ironically, this backward approach to hygiene existed in what was one of Europe's most important political and cultural centres. Major diplomatic decisions, military strategies and trade agreements were discussed in these nauseating conditions. Historians sometimes wonder whether England in history might have taken a different turn had its statesmen worked in cleaner surroundings. Scholarly opinion on Tudor court sanitation remains divided. Some historians argue these accounts reflect foreign prejudice and exaggeration. Yet, given the consistency of multiple independent sources and the limitations of 16th century medical and sanitary knowledge, these records are likely accurate. In Elizabeth's final years, her health declined sharply. Long-term lead poisoning, dental infections, and chronic hygiene problems took their toll. She grew weaker, her memory failed, and her moods became unstable. Yet, even in her last hours, she insisted on makeup, wigs, and preserving the now fragile image of perfection. On the 24th of March, 1603, Elizabeth V died at Richmond Palace. Witnesses said her final appearance was far from the majestic queen in portraits. Her skin an unnatural grey-white from decades of lead use, thinning hair, revealing patchy scalp, and only a few blackened teeth left. Yet, mere hours before death, she had asked her ladies to powder her face and place her finest wig. The Queen, who ruled England for 45 years, embodied a cruel irony, an obsession with perfect appearance that destroyed everything she sought to protect. Her hygiene habits became a symbol of an age reflecting the vanity, ignorance, and self-destruction of 16th century aristocratic culture. When we look back at Elizabeth's reign, we see not only a great politician and military strategist, but also a tragic woman imprisoned by her vanity. She defeated the Spanish Armada and built England's naval dominance, but could not overcome her own pathological pursuit of beauty and perfection. Even the most powerful rulers cannot escape human weakness and the constraints of their time. Elizabeth's story reminds us that behind the glorious moments of history often lie unsettling truths. And when night falls and the palace falls silent, the stench and the suffering still seem to linger within the old stone walls. Time can beautify much, but it cannot alter what truly happened. Elizabeth, celebrated as one of England's greatest monarchs, was also one of history's most shocking cases of poor personal hygiene. Tonight, let us carry these complex and contradictory truths into our dreams, for history is never black and white. It is always full of unexpected details and unsettling realities, and these truths, more than any legend, are the ones that truly make us think. Let the river of time keep flowing, and may those ancient secrets rest in the dark. Good night, and may your dreams be far sweeter than the reality of the Tudor court.